Most people go through life believing focus is something you're either born with or you're not, that it's a talent reserved for the elite, for geniuses, monks, athletes, or military minds. But that's a myth. Focus is not a fixed gift. It is a biological system embedded in your brain. It is a set of neural circuits that can be shaped, molded, and trained just like a muscle. And just like muscles, focus grows through repetition, resistance, and rest. At the core of this system is your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for deliberate attention, goal setting, planning, and suppressing distractions. The stronger the activity in this region, the sharper your ability to stay locked in on a task. But here's what most people don't understand. The prefrontal cortex doesn't work on willpower alone. It strengthens through training, through repetition, through challenge. Each time you sit down to work and your mind wanders and you catch it and then you bring it back, that is a rep. That is a push-up for your brain. That is neuroplasticity in action. The ability to focus is not just about effort. It's about neural alignment. Your brain has an internal spotlight system, technically called the attentional spotlight, and it is constantly shifting. Left untrained, this spotlight drifts toward novelty, toward the loudest thing in the environment, your phone buzzing, a new idea, an emotional impulse. But you can teach your brain to resist that pull. You can teach it to stay steady on one point, one goal, one mission, even when the world tries to scatter it in 100 directions. That is the power of conscious attentional control. And it is a system built by design, not by default. In neuroscience, this process is called top-down control, where your higher order brains of the prefrontal cortex overrides the lower reflexive brain, like the limbic system that reacts impulsively to every ping and push. Focus training is essentially a form of top-down resistance. It's choosing not to scroll, not to react, not to chase the easier path. It's choosing to stay. And every time you stay longer than the moment before, you are literally reinforcing synapses, strengthening electrical pathways, and creating a more focused mind. One of the most effective ways to train this system is through intentional discomfort. Set a timer, choose a task, remove every distraction, and simply sit in that discomfort of focus. Your mind will rebel. You'll feel restlessness, boredom, even anxiety. That is not failure. That is the resistance you are meant to overcome. Focus training is not glamorous. It's not always exciting, but just like lifting weights, it works through tension, not ease. The more you embrace that discomfort, the faster your brain adapts. And as your attention system gets stronger, something fascinating happens. Time begins to stretch. Minutes feel deeper. Thought becomes clearer. Your inner voice calms because the brain is no longer scattered. It is streamlined. It is no longer reacting. It is creating. And that shift is the root of all high performance. Whether you're studying for an exam, building a business, practicing a skill, or pushing your limits in training, your success comes down to how long and how deeply you can maintain directed focus. Training your focus isn't just about avoiding distraction. It's about building cognitive endurance. Most people can only sustain deep focus for a few minutes before drifting. But with deliberate practice, you can push that to 30 minutes, then an hour, then 2. Just like a runner increases mileage, you increase attentional stamina, and every session compounds, every rep adds a layer of strength. And over time, the results are undeniable. You become sharper, faster, more efficient. You begin to outpace others, not because you're smarter, but because you're more focused. And that focus came from training, not talent. There is a misconception that high performers are always in motion, constantly grinding, thinking, pushing forward. But the truth is the most powerful minds operate from a state of internal stillness, not passivity, not laziness, but stillness. Stillness is a strategic position, not an idle one. It is the calm before precision, the readiness before execution. For warriors, this is not optional. It is essential. Mental stillness is what allows a sniper to slow his heartbeat before taking a shot, what enables a martial artist to read subtle shifts in an opponent's body, and what makes a decision maker stay composed when everything around them is chaotic. Stillness is not about doing nothing. It's about doing one thing with absolute clarity. It's the ability to quiet the internal noise so that only the signal remains. And that signal is your objective, your mission, your goal. Neuroscience tells us that mental stillness isn't an abstract idea. It is a neurological state. It is regulated by interactions between the default mode network, the part of your brain involved in mind, wandering and rumination, and the salience network, which governs what's most important to pay attention to in any given moment. Warriors train their salience network to dominate. They decide what matters. They don't let the brain run on autopilot. When the mind is still, the prefrontal cortex, the command center for decision making and focused attention, becomes more active and efficient. You start to notice patterns, make faster judgments, process information more effectively. Your awareness expands while your distractions shrink. That's the paradox of stillness. It's not about less energy. It's about better energy direction. Instead of your mental energy being scattered in 10 different directions, it's funneled like a laser into one. And that is how warriors move with purpose while appearing calm. One of the key methods to induce mental stillness is visual anchoring. When you fix your gaze on a single point, whether it's a target, a horizon, or even a mark on a wall, your visual system communicates to your brain that it's time to narrow attention. The eyes are not just passive receivers of light. They are active triggers for focus states. When your gaze steadies, your mind steadies. And that is no coincidence. It's biology. The brainstem contains circuits that link visual focus to motor control, meaning what you look at influences not only your attention, but your readiness to act. Warriors have known this intuitively for centuries. Neuroscience confirms it today. Another path to stillness is breath control. Shallow, rapid breathing signals. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, and leads to cognitive fragmentation. In contrast, slow, deliberate nasal breathing, especially with extended exhales, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural state of calm readiness. This shift doesn't dull focus. It sharpens it. It drops your heart rate, clears stress hormones like cortisol, and allows the prefrontal cortex to function at full capacity. Every exhale becomes a reset. Every breath becomes a signal to your brain that you are in control. That is not just relaxation. That is readiness. Training stillness means practicing how to be mentally composed under increasing levels of demand. You can simulate this by introducing controlled stress, like timing yourself on a task, training in noisy environments, or working in emotionally charged situations and maintaining calm focus despite it. Each time you resist reactivity, you train your brain to favor response over impulse. You are rewiring your system to operate from intention, not instinct. That's the neuroscience of composure. That's what separates a reactive mind from a focused one. Stillness doesn't mean absence of emotion. It means emotional precision. It's not the absence of thought. It's the presence of discipline. It is the rare ability to pause, to observe, to choose your next move rather than being pulled into reaction. And this ability is not mystical or reserved for monks. It's physical, trainable. It is a neural pattern that strengthens every time you choose focus over frenzy, breath over panic, intention over noise. If there is one neurochemical that shapes how well you can focus, how long you can sustain it, and how intensely you pursue it, it's dopamine. Dopamine is not about pleasure. That's a common misconception. Dopamine is about drive. It is the molecule of motivation, pursuit, and reinforcement. It signals your brain to pay attention to what matters and ignore what doesn't. And when it comes to focus, dopamine acts like a lever, raising or lowering your capacity to concentrate depending on how you use it. Most people assume dopamine is a reward you get after accomplishing something, but that's not how your brain actually works. The most powerful dopamine spikes don't occur when you finish the race. They occur while you're running it. In fact, the most valuable form of dopamine is anticipatory dopamine, the kind you generate when you are striving towards something meaningful. This is what fuels effort, grit, and sustained focus. It is what allows warriors, scientists, artists, and elite performers to stay locked in for hours while others get distracted in minutes. Your brain has a built-in dopamine feedback loop. When you take action toward a goal, dopamine is released in small pulses. That release reinforces your behavior. It tells the brain, this is important, keep going. But here's the key. If you rely solely on external rewards like praise, money, or status, your dopamine response becomes unstable. Your focus begins to depend on outcomes, not effort. And once the outcome disappears, so does your motivation. The solution is to shift from extrinsic dopamine to intrinsic dopamine, the kind you generate internally by learning to reward the process itself. One of the most effective ways to do this is by creating micro goals. Break your work, your mission, or your training into smaller, achievable targets. When you complete one of those micro goals, your brain releases dopamine, creating a sense of progress. That progress, not perfection, is what builds momentum. It doesn't just keep you going. It actually strengthens the neural pathways responsible for sustained attention and effort. You start to crave the process itself, not just the result. That craving is neuroplasticity in motion. Another strategy is mental framing. The way you think about the work you're doing directly affects your dopamine levels. If you see the work as tedious, draining, or meaningless, your dopamine drops. Your focus collapses. But if you frame the same task as meaningful, as part of something bigger, your dopamine rises, your brain becomes more alert. This is not a motivational trick. This is hard neuroscience, reframing your thoughts about the work you're doing by connecting it to growth, mastery, or purpose. triggers the brain's reward system. It's the same dopamine system used by Navy SEALs during extreme endurance training, where mental framing becomes the difference between quitting and finishing. Even your physical state influences dopamine, and therefore focus, sleep deprivation, chronic stress, and poor nutrition reduce dopamine receptor sensitivity. That makes it harder to sustain attention, even if your goals are clear. But when you prioritize sleep, move your body, and expose yourself to natural sunlight, especially early in the day, you naturally upregulate dopamine production and receptor function. That's why foundational habits matter. They don't just make you healthier. They make your focus biologically more sustainable. Your focus is also affected by spikes and crashes in dopamine caused by overstimulation, scrolling social media, jumping between tasks, switching tabs, watching rapid content. These behaviors create fast dopamine hits, but then crash your baseline. And when your baseline dopamine is low, even important tasks feel boring. That's when distraction sets in. Warriors learn to avoid this trap by embracing low stimulation environments. They train focus in silence. They build tolerance for boredom. They don't chase dopamine. They cultivate it. They know that true focus doesn't come from stimulation, but from direction, from repetition, from training the brain to find reward in depth, not novelty. Focus doesn't just depend on what you direct your attention toward. It depends even more on what you actively remove. The human brain has limited attentional bandwidth. It wasn't built for constant input, nonstop alerts, or 1,000 open loops pulling you in different directions. To sharpen your focus, you must first eliminate the noise. The modern world is saturated with distractions, and unless you're intentional, that noise hijacks your neural resources and blunts your cognitive edge. Every time you switch tasks, check your phone, glance at a notification, or let your thoughts wander, your brain pays a tax. That tax is called attentional residue, leftover fragments of focus that remain stuck on the previous task, making it harder to fully engage with the next one. It's not just a mental inconvenience. It's a physiological state. Every shift in focus requires a reset in your prefrontal cortex, which consumes glucose and neurotransmitters like acetylcholine and dopamine. Over time, those reserves get depleted and your mental clarity starts to decay. Warriors understand that clarity is built by subtraction, not addition. They remove what dulls the blade. They strip away what doesn't serve the mission. This begins with the external environment. Your brain is constantly scanning for relevance. Visual clutter, background noise, chaotic workspaces, all of it sends unnecessary signals to the attentional system, forcing your brain to filter through excess input. The more you reduce that input, the more efficiently your brain can lock onto the task at hand. This is not just a productivity hack. It's a neurobiological truth. The fewer distractions in your environment, the less neural noise your brain must suppress. But distraction isn't only external. Internal noise, such as mental chatter, emotional turbulence, or unresolved loops of thought, often does more damage. Unmanaged thoughts act like background apps, draining mental energy even when you're trying to concentrate. You may not notice it, but your focus system does. That's why elite performers build mental hygiene practices to reduce this internal clutter. Tools like journaling, meditation, deep breathing, and visual anchoring help clear mental space so your cognitive bandwidth can be fully devoted to the task, not hijacked by emotional noise. One of the most powerful ways to eliminate noise is through single tasking with full intensity. Multitasking splits attention across competing neural networks. When you're writing an email while checking your phone and thinking about something unrelated, your brain toggles rapidly between tasks, never fully engage in any of them. But when you commit to doing one thing with full presence and remove the possibility of doing anything else, something changes. Your brain enters a flow-prone state. Focus becomes deeper. Neural firing patterns become more synchronized. You begin to experience cognitive resonance, a mental alignment where everything feels locked in. The act of saying no is also a neurological training tool. Every time you resist checking your phone, every time you say no to another tab, another task, another distraction, you are strengthening the top-down control mechanisms of the brain. The circuits involved in resisting distraction, especially those in the anterior cingulate cortex and prefrontal cortex, get stronger through use. That's how you train willpower, not by gritting your teeth, but by gradually increasing your capacity to resist impulse and stay with the target. True warriors don't just protect their focus during the task. They design their entire day to support it. This includes choosing when to work, where to work, and how to prepare for work. For example, many high performers use the first 90 minutes of the day when dopamine levels and cortisol are naturally elevated to do their most cognitively demanding work in a distraction-free environment. This isn't random. It's a strategy based on circadian neurobiology. Focus isn't a random state you fall into. It's a system you build by removing interference, protecting cognitive resources, and sharpening the blade of attention through deliberate design of both your external world and internal habits. Your ability to focus begins with your eyes. Before your brain decides what to pay attention to, your visual system sets the stage. This is not metaphor. It is hardwired biology. Vision and attention are deeply linked, not just psychologically, but neurologically. When you aim your eyes at something, you're doing more than just looking. You are sending a signal to your brain. This is what matters. This is where to send energy. This is the mission. In the brain, the systems that control visual attention and cognitive focus are closely integrated. The frontal eye fields, a region involved in controlling eye movements, communicate directly with the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for goal-directed behavior and sustained focus. When your eyes lock onto a specific object, task, or target, this coordination activates a neural spotlight, enhancing mental clarity and suppressing irrelevant input. That's why athletes, warriors, and elite performers use their eyes not just to see, but to lock in. Visual targeting is the foundation of attentional anchoring. When you focus your gaze narrowly on one point, you create a kind of tunnel vision that stabilizes your internal state. This narrow focus activates the magnocellular pathway, which is optimized for motion detection and fast processing, and simultaneously suppresses broad environmental scanning. In practical terms, this means your brain stops looking for distractions. You create a neurological signal of commitment. The act of narrowing your gaze narrows your attention, and that alignment is the gateway to deep focus. This principle has been used intuitively by warriors for centuries. A sniper locking onto a target, a martial artist fixing their eyes on an opponent's chest, a surgeon focusing on a single point within a high-stakes operation. These aren't just habits of focus. They are strategies grounded in biology. When your visual system engages fully, your brain shifts from diffuse mode, a state of relaxed, broad awareness, into task, positive mode, which enhances goal-directed behavior, suppresses the default mode network, and heightens attention to detail. In moments of stress or chaos, visual targeting becomes even more important. Under pressure, your visual field often becomes erratic. Your gaze flits around. Micro movements in the eyes reflect micro movements in your attention. But when you regain control over your visual field, when you hold your gaze still, steady and intentional, your internal systems follow, your heart rate slows, your breath evens out, the reticular activating system in your brainstem gets the message. Now is the time to lock in. This process is immediate and trainable. You don't have to wait for calm to arrive. You initiate it through visual command. Visual targeting also helps regulate emotional reactivity. When the eyes scan rapidly or dart around, it tends to reflect hyperarousal, a stress response. But a fixed gaze tells the limbic system that the environment is stable and controlled. This suppresses unnecessary threat detection and allows the executive networks of the brain to stay online. In short, where the eyes go, the mind follows, and when the eyes are steady, the mind becomes steady too. To train this system, start by practicing gaze anchoring exercises. Pick a small object, a dot on the wall, a mark on your desk, and hold your gaze on it for 60 seconds. No movement, no scanning. Breathe through your nose. As your visual attention locks, notice how your thoughts begin to slow. Your awareness shifts from scattered to singular. This is not just stillness. This is priming the brain for high performance focus. Over time, increase the complexity of the task. Anchor your gaze while performing cognitively demanding work. Use fixed gaze before entering a high pressure situation. Direct your visual field toward the center of a goal or project before you begin. You are not just looking, you are programming your nervous system for engagement. You are activating the hardware of focus through the gateway of vision. This is why the most focused people in the world don't rely on discipline alone. They use their eyes to control their brain, their body, and their behavior. The modern mindset often glorifies constant output, more hours, more effort, more grind. But focus is not a limitless resource. It is a high performance neural function that demands recovery in order to sustain power. Just like a warrior cannot train endlessly without rest, the brain's focus systems require cycles of activation and renewal. Recovery is not a reward after performance. It is a biological prerequisite for peak performance. It is the hidden multiplier that determines whether your focus remains sharp or slowly disintegrates over time. At the core of sustained focus is your prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for attention, decision-making, and planning. But this part of the brain consumes significant energy, both metabolic and neurochemical. During prolonged periods of intense focus, neurotransmitters like dopamine and acetylcholine get depleted. If these reserves aren't replenished, the neural circuitry starts to glitch. You may feel foggy, scattered, unmotivated, or impulsive. This is not a sign of weakness or lack of willpower. It's neurochemical fatigue. And the only solution is strategic recovery. Recovery doesn't just mean sleep, though sleep is foundational. Deep sleep, particularly stages 3 and 4, plays a critical role in restoring neuromodulator systems. During these stages, the brain flushes out metabolic waste via the glymphatic system, reorganizes memories, and resets neurotransmitter sensitivity. Without adequate sleep, especially consistent sleep across the same circadian window, the brain's ability to focus collapses, no matter how disciplined your routine is. The most focused individuals protect their sleep like a warrior protects his weapon, not out of luxury, but out of necessity. But recovery is not limited to the night. There are powerful tools that can be used during the day to restore focus systems in real time. One of the most effective is NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. This includes practices like yoga nidra, deep guided relaxation, or even ultra short naps of 10-20 minutes. These protocols allow the brain to enter states where it slows down, detaches from active thinking, and rebalances its neurochemistry. What makes NSDR different from passive rest is that it's deliberate and structured. It teaches your nervous system how to downshift without needing full sleep. Even 10 minutes of NSDR can restore a depleted prefrontal cortex and prepare it for another deep work session. Another form of recovery is cyclical focus. The brain was not designed to operate in one long stretch. Research shows that the optimal duration for deep focus is typically around 90 minutes, followed by a recovery period of 15-30 minutes. This mirrors your brain's ultradian rhythms, which naturally rise and fall throughout the day. Ignoring these rhythms by pushing endlessly leads to burnout. Respecting them builds rhythm, resilience, and long-term performance. During these breaks, it's important to completely disengage from cognitive demands. No multitasking, no notifications, no half resting. True recovery comes from full detachment, not diluted attention. Physical movement is also a form of recovery. Light aerobic activity, such as walking outdoors, especially in nature, helps reset the attentional system. Movement increases blood flow to the brain, elevates mood, regulating neurotransmitters like serotonin and norepinephrine, and lowers cortisol. Taking a walk after a deep work session is not lost time. It is neural reset time. It is a strategic shift from sympathetic, high alert activation to parasympathetic recovery mode, allowing your brain to restore its capacity for the next cognitive challenge. Breathing protocols also serve as rapid recovery tools. Physiological size, 2 quick nasal inhales followed by a slow exhale have been shown to reduce stress and restore calm within seconds. These are biological levers built into the human system. Warriors use them not just to calm emotions, but to bring the nervous system back into a focused baseline after high effort. Strategic breathing isn't about relaxation. It's about resetting the internal operating system so that focus can be rebooted and re-engaged with clarity. Recovery also extends into your emotional environment. Chronic stress, unresolved tension, and emotional fatigue all drain focus. That's because they keep the amygdala and limbic system in a state of mild threat, which hijacks cognitive resources and impairs executive function, creating environments of psychological safety, even if just within your own routines, allows the brain to shift from survival mode to performance mode. Daily practices like reflection, gratitude, or solitude aren't just feel-good habits. They are emotional recovery tools that protect your ability to think, decide, and focus at the highest level